Chapter 12. Time for another favor. I'd like you to pick up a pencil and hold it for a second, the way you do when you're writing. Now look at your hand. See how the pencil falls between your fingers like that? Some on top and some on the bottom? Probably someone told you to hold it that way back when you were first learning how to write, and you've never even thought about it since then. I bet you just pick up a pencil and boom, fingers all in place. I bet you think it's really no big deal to be able to hold it like that. I bet you think everyone can do it. Well, Georgie can't. When Georgie wants to write something, he holds his pencil with 4 fingers wrapped all the way around, the way you'd make a fist. You should try it for a second. Feels kind of funny, doesn't it? But that's the only way Georgie can write, because his fingers are only about half as long as yours. So even things like writing a sentence take a little bit more work than you might think. Same with turning a doorknob or putting a key in a lock. Things you might not think about twice about. Imagine trying to hold a violin bow with fingers like that. You can put down your pencil now. Early Saturday evening, Georgie and his parents piled into the minivan with the harp and the cello stowed safely in the back. Georgie's mom was wearing a fancy black dress with her hair piled up on top of her head, and both Georgie and his dad were wearing tuxedos. Technically, only Georgie's dad had to wear a tuxedo, since Georgie was just going to be sitting in the audience. But ever since Georgie's parents had paid for his custom-made tux for his Aunt Kayla's wedding, they tried to get as much use out of it as possible. Georgie didn't mind too much. It sort of made him feel like a member of the orchestra. Georgie's mom had just put in a CD of Pachelbel's Canon, and they were only a few blocks away from their house when Georgie's dad pointed out the window. "Isn't that Andy?" he said. Georgie looked. It was, in fact, Andy and Russ walking 5 dogs apiece down the sidewalk. "No," Georgie said quickly, "that's not him." "I think it is," his mom said. "Why don't we stop for a second and you can just say hi?" "It's not him, Mom," Georgie shouted. "Georgie," his dad said sternly, "that's no way to talk to your mother." "Sorry," he mumbled. He saw his parents give each other a look, but Georgie's dad drove past Andy and Russ without stopping. When they got to the concert hall and parked in the back, one of the other cello players came out and helped Georgie's dad pull the instruments out of the minivan. Georgie's mom unbuckled her seatbelt and turned around to face Georgie, but she didn't say anything. She just looked at him, like she was studying his face in case there was a quiz on it later. "Mom," he asked. She reached a hand out to pat his knee. "Just wondering if everything's okay with you." "Everything's okay," he said, and looked out the window. It was gloomy outside. He wondered if it would snow again. His mom was still looking at him when he turned back. "You know, we haven't seen Andy around the house for a few weeks," she said. "Are you sure there's nothing?" "I'm fine, Mom." 2 weeks ago, Georgie wouldn't have given anything for his parents to notice that he'd had a fight with Andy. But now it was too late. There was nothing that they could do to help him anymore. He'd been permanently replaced. She gave his knee another pat. "You know, you can tell me if something's wrong," she said. "Yep," Georgie said as he opened the door. "I know." As the orchestra tuned up and practiced, Georgie sat on the front row of the theater to watch and listen. When they finished, everyone headed backstage, while the ushers began to seat the audience. Georgie spent that time hanging out backstage with the orchestra, listening to them chatter about nothing in particular as they nibbled sandwiches. Georgie ate 2 ham and cheese sandwiches and a handful of carrots. Then he filed back into the audience and took his usual seat in the front row, smack in the center. The concert went beautifully. Georgie hummed along softly when he knew the notes, and he watched as the musicians he had just seen eating turkey sandwiches sat up there on that stage and worked together to play one perfect melody after another. And after it was all over, when the last notes of music had drifted out of the concert hall, Georgie climbed the steps to the stage. That was one of his favorite things to do, stand up on the stage after everyone in the audience had left and look out onto the rows and rows of empty seats. He liked wandering around all the musicians as they put away their instruments. It was peaceful up there, observing all the things that went on after the concert, the careful cleaning of instruments, the chatting, the discussions about future performances. Georgie was watching one of the musicians put her bassoon back on in its case piece by piece when Franco, the tuba player, walked right up to him. "Hey there, Georgie," Franco said, rubbing the shiny bald spot of his head. "How'd you like the show tonight?" "Went pretty well," Georgie said, nodding. He liked Franco because sometimes backstage he'd show him card tricks. "Well, you are our best critic," Georgie told him with a wink. "And I hear you're going to be a big brother soon." Georgie tried not to frown. Yeah," he said. "Pretty exciting stuff, eh?" He leaned down close toward Georgie, placing his chubby hands on his knee and lowering his voice. "The question around here is what instrument the kid's gonna take up. Personally, I'm betting on the cello, like your old man." Georgie was sure he was frowning now, but he didn't bother to hide it. "Some folks swear up and down that it'll be the violin, though. You got any guesses, Georgie?" "Huh?" Georgie looked at Franco and blinked quickly. "No." Franco straightened up and rubbed his head again. "I gotta say, Georgie, I like the monkey suit." Georgie looked down at his tux and shrugged. "Mom made me wear it," he answered. "Well, it looks great," Franco told him. "You look just like one of the band. Ever think of playing tuba?" Georgie smiled back weakly. Maybe," he said. I think I should go now." "All right, bye, Georgie. It was good seeing you." When Georgie got home, his parents went to change out of their concert clothes right away. But Georgie stayed in his tuxedo, and he did something he hadn't done in a very long time. He sat down at the grand piano in the front room. He placed himself carefully on the polished black bench, making sure that his cushion-made jacket fell just so over the edge of the seat. He sat exactly the way that he'd seen so many professional pianists sit so many times before, back straight, gaze focused, shoulders squared, and placed his hands on the keys. He spread his fingers as far as he could, farther and farther apart, until the skin between them turned white. Back when Georgie was 5, only 8 inches shorter, but still big on hope, he used to sit in his mother's lap while she played the piano. He would spread his fingers on top of hers, and her hands would dance through the melody together. When Georgie was 7, the height of an average 3-year-old, he used to tape popsicle sticks to his fingers before he played. He'd place a phone book on the piano bench and slip through the music book until he found the perfect song, one where the notes moved in great black waves across the page. And when he'd sit there with his popsicle stick fingers and pretend that he knew how to play it. But by the time he was 9, Georgie had been to enough of his parents' concerts to understand that no one could play an instrument with popsicle sticks. And as often as he pushed his ugliest thought to the back of his head, he always managed to find its way out again. Georgie would never be a musician. He'd never be taller than his dad's cello, let alone able to wrap his arms around it. His feet would never reach the pedals of a piano, and his fingers would never be long enough to play the flute. He'd never be able to grasp a drumstick properly or stretch his arms out far enough to reach the strings of his mother's harp. And if he tried to hold a tuba, it would crush him flat. Even when his parents tried him out on the kid-sized violin, Georgie had trouble bending his wrist to hold the bow, because he wasn't just short, and he didn't just have stubby fingers. He had back problems and wrist problems, sometimes even trouble bending his elbows all the way. So even if Georgie did have the talent of a violin virtuosa hidden somewhere deep inside of him, no one would ever know it. But the baby, well, he was practically a professional cellist already, according to Franco. Before Georgie was born, he had everyone in the orchestra taken bets on what instrument he would play, and how disappointed had they been when they discovered that they were wrong. Had his parents been upset too? Georgie couldn't blame them for wanting a second kid, a normal-looking, violin-playing musical genius, but it still hurt being permanently replaced. Georgie slammed his fingers into the piano keys as loudly as he could and banged the lid shut. Then he ran to his room and slammed the door too. He caught sight of the poem on his wall, and suddenly he hated it more than anything in the world. "Choose the instrument that suits you. Pack your things and come along. Everyone is waiting for you. Only you complete our song." Georgie didn't belong in this room for musicians. He didn't even belong in his own family. He was short, miserable, and still wearing an ugly custom-made tuxedo. He curled up on his bed and buried his head under the pillow so he wouldn't have to see the poem anymore. And he tried as hard as he could to forget about everything, but he simply couldn't. When his parents came in to check on him, Georgie pretended to be asleep. Then, when the house was completely silent, he crept out of his bed in his wrinkled tux and tiptoed into the living room. There, on the couch, he found the big fat book about babies, and he flipped through it until he discovered what he was looking for. 11 inches. That's how tall the baby was now. Georgie returned to his room and made the mark on his closet wall, changed into his pajamas, and then climbed into bed. But he didn't sleep very well. He couldn't stop thinking about how 11 inches was almost as tall as the violin he'd been completely unable to play.